60% mental and 40% physical.
Math was never our strong suit, but breaking down Ohio State football is. Sit back and join us for Buckeye Grove Instant Access, part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You can do it!
Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. Post-game thoughts, immediate analysis, and much, much more to put the big game into perspective. Without any further delay of game, here's your host, Kevin Noon.
Kevin, goddammit.
Welcome to a Wednesday edition of the BIA podcast, Buckeye Grove Instant Access. Maybe that should be the BGIA podcast, but that doesn't work out that well. But happy that you joined us here on Wednesday. I'm going to be joined by Griffin Strom here in a second, and we're going to talk all things Buckeyes. If you had a chance to catch up with us on Monday, we talked at length about the week that was. Maybe more of a national view, but we're going to dial things back to what everybody who's listening to this show cares about, the Ohio State Buckeyes. And with that, I bring in Griffin Strom. How are you doing, Griffin?
I'm doing wonderful. How about yourself, Mr. Noon?
Oh, doing well. Mr. Noon was my dad. Don't ever call me that again. I was going to say it's Kevin or Sir. So, okay, we'll go with Kevin or Noon. Everybody just calls me Noon. But let's get right to it and start with. I mean, I don't think it was unexpected news, but I guess it's official now. Shaun Wade and Wyatt Davis have been cleared for full go with Ohio State after they opted back in after opting out briefly for this upcoming season that starts here in a few weeks, and obviously quite impactful for the Buckeyes' chances this year.
Yeah, I know Wyatt was back on the practice field pretty quickly after he made the announcement that he was trying to come back, but because they were showing that pictures of him and whatnot. But I know they had to cross some T's and dot the I's with both of those guys in terms of, they had declared for the draft. People thought it was a little bit strange. Shaun Wade went on SportsCenter and said that he did have an agent, but he hadn't signed anything officially. So I'm sure there was some last kind of weird things they had to clear up there to make that stuff all be totally official. I know Shaun Wade was still getting the clear. I think last week we heard from Coach Combs and people like that Shaun wasn't back on the field yet because he was waiting on some last COVID-19 quarantine clearances and stuff like that. But now it seems like they're both cleared in that regard, as well as the official, NFL draft declaration stuff. They're back for, officially and good to go, it seems.
And the NC2A, much maligned through so many of the processes out there, but it doesn't seem like anybody so far has been denied being able to come back in at this point. And we've seen some other opt-ins in terms of Rondale Moore at Purdue and Jalen Mayfield at Michigan. But I think it's good for the game. I think it's good for the NC2A and good for the game, and obviously good for these kids to give them an opportunity, because we're dealing with kind of a once in a lifetime situation. You kind of need to rewrite the rules as you go along.
Yeah, I mean, in a season where the Big Ten is going back and forth on whether the season's happening at all, I think it would be so unfair for to kind of hold these kids to a decision of their own. That's such a big thing. I mean, even with Rashad Bateman for Minnesota, I know he had said originally that he was worried about his health because he has asthma or something like that, or at least that was part of it. It might have been more about other things behind the scenes. But you should be allowed to have more time to consider. Maybe he considered maybe it isn't as big of a health risk, as I initially thought, and things like that, and be able to kind of come to a final conclusion now that the Big Ten has as well. And I know Ryan Day was talking about that on the radio the other day as well. He was just saying that all the players in the Big Ten should have a chance to, whatever decision they initially made. So much has changed now, and the season is back, and they should all have the chance to come back. And you're seeing that happen with a lot of guys. I know one guy we just saw here that isn't coming back, though, is Penn State All-American linebacker Micah Parsons. So that's kind of the big one for Ohio State because they are playing Penn State, in that second week coming up here in not too long. But it looks like Penn State will be without arguably their best player, as James Franklin confirmed today, it seems.
Yeah, that's obviously a hit for the Nittany Lions. He was a bit of a problem for Ohio State last year when the two teams played, and now will not be involved in that game. But you sit there and you look at the Big Ten, and they did have, they had their fair share of opt-outs or whatnot, and most of them are opting back in, whereas in the Pac-12, the opt-outs kind of continue, and Ohio State would have played Oregon in week 2 under normal circumstances, and you look at this Oregon team that's going to start with the rest of the Pac-12 playing, in November. Oregon has been decimated with a lot of opt-outs, so it certainly is. Any reviews or any previews that we wrote of any teams going into the start of the season need to be amended in a lot of ways because you just don't know. You have to check a roster to know who's going to be there and who's not.
Right. And yeah, it really just feels like the Pac-12, just missed the boat there on the timing with their decision to come back. It's like maybe if they'd been able to get that restart the same day as the Big Ten, they could have potentially saved some of those opt-outs, but it just seems like that timing was just a little bit late for them.
Let's, turn the page to something else. We had the opportunity to get on a Zoom call with Brian Hartline and several of the Ohio State returning receivers. We didn't get to talk to the young guys, but we, the first-year players, but we had a chance to talk to Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, Jameson Williams, Demario McCall, the man without a position at this point. What were some of your major impressions from things that we heard from them here during this call this week?
Yeah, coming from kind of the number one wide receiver for Ohio State, Chris Olave, kind of the headline guy for that group. I thought it was very interesting because in sports in general, you always talk about wanting your athlete to have a short memory, forgetting about that last mistake. You know what I mean? Forgetting about that interception that a quarterback just threw in the last possession, things like that. But that seems not to be the case when we talk to Chris Olave in regards to the end of the Fiesta Bowl last year. As everyone will remember, the Buckeyes are marching down the field, looking to take the lead at the end of the game. And Fields and Olave just had a miscue on a long ball to the end zone. Olave broke the route off to the left and kind of slipped in the end zone. Fields threw it to the right, and it ended up in an interception. And Clemson went on to play for the national championship. And then afterwards, Chris Olave kind of basically assumed all the responsibility and said, that was my fault for breaking the route off like that. It wasn't Justin Fields' fault, which really seemed like a mature move for just a second-year player at the time. But he got a lot of questions about that yesterday when we talked to him, and he said that he's not really past that yet. He's kind of been dwelling on that for quite a while, and especially during the quarantine months, kind of when there wasn't a lot of distractions. It seemed like he was saying, he had a lot of time to kind of think about things, and his mind kept kind of going back to that mishap in the Fiesta Bowl. And I thought that was very interesting that he just kept saying no, I'm still not over that. But it wasn't like he was so stuck on it that it's and it's going to be an issue for him. More like he really just wants to get back on the field and kind of erase that by making having a better season, making bigger plays, and finishing off the season in a different way. So I feel like there's definitely kind of a balance there between letting that affect you too much where it's in your head versus using it as kind of motivational fuel. What were your thoughts about that?
One of the things that stood out to me, and I won't say it stood out the most, but it was kind of a small thing in there when we were talking to Brian Hartline, and there's been so much buzz about Jackson Smith and Jigba and G. Scott and Julian Fleming, but there mixed in there was a little comment about Mookie Cooper, him being a little further along, or not even a little further along than he would have expected. Let's remember Mookie Cooper wasn't able to play his senior season, so it's been a minute since he has played football in any organized way, shape, or form. And I think a lot of people under normal circumstances would have put him as a candidate to be a red shirt. There are not going to be any red shirts this year. There may be guys who don't play just because they're not ready or whatnot, but with this year not counting in terms of eligibility and things on that along those lines, I think it's encouraging to hear, the positive news on Mookie when he often is the forgotten man in that 4-man receiver class.
Yeah, and also I just feel like Hartline was a little bit, tight-lipped when it came to like really. He didn't have a lot of like flowery compliments kind of about the group. You know what I mean? And it seemed like his comments on Mookie Cooper. Not to say that the group isn't great. I just, obviously as a coach, you don't want to start, saying, my guys are just the most amazing. You know what I mean? But he did have. It did seem like his comments about Mookie Cooper had a more positive tone. It just kind of showed that he was kind of, pleasantly surprised about what he was seeing. And so that was definitely good news for Ohio State in general.
One other angle I want to take here, and this goes more to a story you wrote earlier in the week, is about Cameron Babb, a player who's really had awful luck with injuries since he's been at Ohio State. Somebody cue Johnny Dixon as we, have this type of conversation. And coming out of a Ryan Day media appearance, it sounded like Cameron Babb is very much on the right path.
Yeah, he wasn't even, Ryan Day wasn't even specifically asked about Cameron Babb or that situation. He kind of brought it up on his own. He was just asked about, a couple of guys like the running backs coming off of injuries, like Master Teague and Marcus Crowley. Crowley with his ACL tear, obviously. And then Ryan Day just kind of on his own accord brought up Cameron Babb there in that same kind of breath and said that they're hoping he's going to be able to get on the field for them this season. Obviously, Cameron Babb had an ACL tear back in the spring of 2019, which basically, ended his chances of playing in that season. And he's had like 4 season-ending injuries dating back to like his final year in St. Louis before coming to Ohio State, I believe. And so he just basically said that, they're hopeful that he's going to come back. He said that he could be an amazing story one day. Obviously, as you just alluded to, there have been some, amazing stories with guys whose kind of early career at Ohio State, was very unfortunate for them. You look at a guy like Justin Hilliard, who just became a captain in his 6th year with the team. I think they're really hoping that Cameron Babb can kind of come back and be one of those stories. I know you like to say that Cameron Babb might be the best pure wide receiver on the roster. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that, and I certainly felt that way last year. I mean, bringing in the true freshmen that they are, there's some studs in that class that are now on the roster. But when it just comes to having all of the skills and all of the abilities, I put Cameron Babb right up there against anybody at that point. And I think that, not to get historical here, but I think Ohio State certainly kind of changed the way that it approached the receiver position. And we see a lot of Ohio State receivers on NFL rosters. I mean, it's been the year of the injuries, so a lot of these guys are dinged up. But I think that you saw under a couple years ago, we want a guy that can run for days, and we'll figure out the rest later. And that that's not taking anything away from a Paris Campbell, a Terry McLaurin, any of those types of guys. But I think that we've seen a little bit more of a change of, it's not that Ohio State is bringing in slow receivers by any stretch of the imagination, but when Chris Olave, a lightly regarded 3-star in terms of the recruiting rankings, comes in and bursts onto the scene, that certainly was something there. And then, you look at their class of 2020 with the 4 guys there. You look at what they're doing in 21 with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jaden Ballard already in the fold, and right up there for Emeka Ibuka out of Washington State. It's quite the change. And to try and make a long story short and get back to Cameron Babb, Babb always seemed to have, just based on everything that I'd seen on the prep level, I think he always had like the highest upside of everybody, and it was just, it was a crying shame that they couldn't get him out on the field. And we're in a position, we want to see the kids do well and everything, but we're not here to root anything on. But you have to root a little bit for Cameron Babb, because losing his senior season, losing his first couple years at Ohio State, I think a lot of people had him in Penn on a medical hardship list, and to hear that he's doing well is a good situation.
Yeah, he's one of those guys again that just benefits so much from the NCAA eligibility ruling from August. Especially if he can get on the field this year, because he's already had a redshirt season. If he can actually get some time this year and then come back the following year and won't kind of run more time off his clock, that's going to be great for him. And then kind of another theme that you were talking about there with the speed versus kind of more complete skill set at the wide receiver position. That was kind of the theme that they were talking about a lot with Jamison Williams yesterday. A guy that's got like 4.40 time speed, but they were just asking, is he going to be able to show that he's more than just, a fast guy at that wide receiver position? And Brian Hartline seemed to think that he's been doing a good job of showing that he can be a more complete wide receiver. And it seemed like both Jamison Williams and Brian Hartline were saying that he has kind of cleaned things up off of the field in terms of academics and kind of organizing his situation, for whatever that may be, off of the field, and that's kind of reflected on the field, which has kind of allowed him to be mentioned by the Ryan Days of the world. He was like the third guy when Ryan Days just listing off receivers. He said, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jamison Williams. I think that raised some eyebrows, because people are like, oh, is he in that class of, with those two guys that everyone feels like are going to be those top two guys? And it sounds like he's emerging a little bit there.
Yeah, he certainly showed some excitement early in the season last year, and then kind of disappeared at that point. But we didn't even get into Demario McCall, and we're gonna have to turn the page to the next topic here. We will talk about him at another point, but it is a big day for Ohio State. We'll tell you why here on the other side of this quick break. Egg Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com. Welcome back to the BIA podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, and I'm joined by staff writer Griffin Strom, and we are talking the Ohio State Buckeyes. As I said before the quick break, it's a big day. Ohio State now can put the pads on. It's the 30th. Daily testing starts for COVID testing at Ohio State and throughout the Big Ten, and they made sure that the first day of I guess, real practice, I mean, if you listen to Kerry Combs, who was quote unquote sick and tired of this basketball BS, let's put some pads on. It's a big opportunity. So I'm sure there's a lot of excitement, but I also am sure that the coaches don't want to go from, and they certainly weren't at zero by any stretch of the imagination, but they don't want to step on the gas too quickly and risk injuries with the season still is 3+ weeks away, but there's not a lot of time to be dealing with things like that. We saw one of Indiana's top defenders down for the season after an ACL injury. They certainly don't want to mimic any of those type of errors.
Yeah, it's got to be tough to kind of work that balance of ramping back up to full contact and pad work, because I know they're like you said with Kerry Combs, we're sick and tired of this basketball BS. Brian Hartline was kind of saying the same things, like they're just ready to, actually get those pads on. There's so much stuff that they can't do, or can't really tell about the team unless they start, getting those pads on. But at the same time, Ryan Day keeps saying they haven't had pads on since the Fiesta Bowl. It's been like 9 months since they've done stuff in pads, really. And so you just wonder, if making such a sharp turn to getting those pads on it and going full contact again might, be disastrous in some sense. But especially, the season is less than a month away at this point. And I'm sure they feel like they've got to speed things along, but at the same time, like you said, you don't want to do that and risk injuries. But yeah, certainly a big day. I mean, right when the season was reinstated, it was kind of like, oh, okay, well, can you guys go straight to practice now? And it was like, okay, not that fast. We still got a couple weeks to wait here for these tests to get in. I guess I'm kind of wondering, once they start doing these daily tests, are we gonna start hearing about guys being potentially, sidelined for a few weeks, like guys that they might not have known had stuff or things like that. That's just kind of on the back of my mind about this new daily testing stuff that they've got going on. But it's definitely a good day for Ohio State, a big day, a big step, a big obstacle that was still in the way. But basically here, ramping up for them, it's going to be all systems go.
Yeah, you talk about, are we going to hear about it? Officially, no, but that stuff always seems to come out at the end or whatnot. And, with the Big Ten having, instead of a 10-day or 14-day, having 21 days, certainly doesn't bode well. But I mean, I guess if you're going to have, if there's a time to have it, it would be now. I don't know. I mean, because the last 7 days of that 21-day cycle are kind of a ramp up to get back to be ready for competition or whatnot. But you certainly could see depth charts kind of thrown into disarray if there's any sort of situation like that. But, the Big Ten certainly has not allowed itself any wiggle room in terms of 9 games in 9 weeks. And, there's no way to push games around. Whereas we've seen ACC and some other conferences have to move games, and games that were supposed to happen already, potentially happening December 5th or whatnot, and already talk of, at least one of the conferences maybe having to push its conference championship game from the 12th to the 19th and whatnot. There's so much unknown.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just been kind of jarring, and obviously there's so many differences, and and the NFL guys are getting paid, a ton of money, in a lot of circumstances, or in a lot of cases, and in college football, these guys are on college campuses around a lot of other, people and whatnot. But it's crazy how the NFL has only had a few cases, but in college football, it seems like I was seeing the stuff about Notre Dame, and they games just getting postponed. It seems like there's just been so many more issues in college football than there has been in the NFL. I just wonder. I don't know all that much about. Maybe you do, and you can speak to this if you do. But is the daily testing and whatnot for the Big Ten and the stuff that they're doing for COVID testing a lot different than how the other conferences are handling things?
I haven't stayed up to date on that, and I kind of, as something is no longer, I guess, front burner, I kind of lose track of it.
Yep.
I know, I think a lot of leagues probably are still doing 6-day-a-week testing or whatnot. I think that the daily testing was a game changer, but the Pac-12 came out first with, well before they had any plans of actually playing before January, with their teaming up with a testing partner. I would have to figure other conferences are doing in kind. I mean, and certainly once you get to December and, into January and bowl season and whatnot, when you're finally coming out of the bubble of your own conference, not necessarily a bubble like Disney and the NBA or Toronto and the NHL. Congratulations to the Tampa Bay Lightning for winning the Stanley Cup. It's you're dealing with other teams out of other conferences that may not be dealing with, may not have the same protocol. So you have to wonder if college football playoff, knock on wood, we get to that point and everything. If they have, if getting into that 4-team tournament, if they put their own thing in place, and you have to be at least at XYZ level of testing and precaution and so on and so forth. Hell, I've said, and this isn't going to happen, what they really should do is just play the college football playoff in a bubble. And by that, I mean, do not necessarily a double header, but do a Friday, Saturday with your two national semifinals, all four of those teams in a bubble, legitimately in like the Disney bubble. And, the teams that come up short and lose their games, they're free to go home and whatever. And then your two winners stay there. They have, facilities to where they can practice, and you play the game the following week. And honestly, if you set it up like that, we're not going to have a traditional bowl season in terms of where guys are going to be riding the log ride at Disneyland or going to Lowry's and doing the Beef Bowl, and a lot of those appearances aren't probably going to happen. I think you could sit there and do all of that within, I don't know, 10, 11 days in totality. So, whereas, a bowl week, just the bowl week itself is generally 7 days. And,
Yep.
and then lead up to the championship game, which is treated more like an actual game, is 3 or 4 days. You just put all that together. You take kind of the time out of the middle of it. I think that makes a lot of sense, but you have cities bidding for this stuff. You have to throw a bone to the traditional bowl games and whatnot, with the Rose and the Sugar being your national semifinals, and then your championship game being in South Florida. I don't think anybody's going to want to give up on that. So it makes too much sense to happen.
Yeah, I mean, the situations are already, the players are already at like a hotel, but you might as well just, make that hotel that they're staying at, kind of a bubble. Because you with a game that big and all the money at stake and everything, if they do get to that point already, imagine it being up until that point that a Justin Fields or a Trevor Lawrence or somebody like that is suddenly ineligible for the biggest game of the season. Why even take that risk? Why not just do a bubble at that point, no matter what the kind of cost is? Because I just feel like it would just be so worth it. I think it does make a lot of sense what the plan you're kind of laying out there.
Well, if Notre Dame has taught us anything, by God, don't have a team meal. Don't have a team meal, since that seems to be the root of where some of the issues for the Fighting Irish came from.
Yeah.
Well, let's move quickly to Ohio State starts practices with tackling and taking guys, potentially down to the ground here on Wednesday. There's supposed to be a scrimmage on Saturday at Ohio Stadium, an empty Ohio Stadium, which is going to be kind of par for the course for what the Big Ten season looks like, barring some sort of change of heart. That won't happen. What do you think, with 3 days potentially, and I don't even know exactly what that schedule looks like as to where off days and things like that would be, but, what do you think they would like to see in a scrimmage that happens that quickly after finally getting to tackling? And I can assure you that, in that kind of scrimmage, they're not going to be like, play to the echo of the whistle or anything. They're going to be keeping it safe.
Yeah, I mean, I just think they're trying to just get back into an actual rhythm of doing normal things that they would usually do, and just kind of get really a baseline for what the team is looking like. I mean, Brian Hartline talked about it yesterday. You really don't know, just kind of how physical. You just don't know exactly who your team is, the identity of your team, until you get those pads on, because that's such a big part of the game. And I don't know, like you said, I don't know how much you can really glean from about that from that initial scrimmage just a couple days after you put pads on for the first time. I just think they're trying to get back into a rhythm of doing what they would normally do, and being able to have a scrimmage and start to just ramp that stuff up.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what ends up coming out of that. So I don't know. Hopefully we will start to hear some things trickling out of there shortly after that's done, but you just never know. But let's kind of wrap it up with, anybody who listened to my 45-minute diatribe on Monday heard me talk about last week in college football, but I'm going to open it even a little wider because it's been a minute since we've had you on the show. What have your impressions of the college football season to date been at this point? And what kind of stands out?
Well, last weekend really was, a standout weekend for the season. Obviously, the SEC started play. I turned on the Oklahoma Kansas State game, and I mean, I just had at that point it was like 28-7. I'm pretty sure in the second half or something. I just had a feeling about that game, and man, that I made the right call in turning that game on because Kansas State just came roaring back. I think when I turned it on, Spencer Rattler had like only 2 incompletions that they were both for picks. But then by the point that I turned it on, like he really kind of didn't do many great things after that point. So that was just kind of interesting to see K-State knock off Oklahoma for the second straight season. I saw you tweeted the Big 12 is out before the Big 10 is even in, which I thought was funny. And then obviously you had the real shocker though later on in the Texas Tech game. Texas Tech had a big rushing touchdown with like 3 minutes to go. They were up 56-40. I thought that the game was just completely. I thought that was the dagger of the game. I literally turned it off to turn on like LSU, Mississippi State, or whatever it was, and then I turned the Texas game back on, and Texas, they're like at the goal line, scored a touchdown and a 2-point conversion to send it to OT, and they end up winning. I was like, man, that is a deflating comeback. But yeah, it's certainly been weird with the different timelines of teams playing and stuff. The postponing of games, the fact that some teams are going to have non-conference games and some are not. Some teams are going to play more games. Some teams are going to play less games. But I mean, last season just showed you how exciting college football is, and just how glad I think everyone is to have games like that, even though it is strange with the empty stadiums. Kansas State pulling off a big upset in Norman, Oklahoma. It didn't feel exactly. You couldn't feel how deflating that must have been for all the Sooner fans. You know what I mean? Because they weren't, in the crowd. You couldn't really feel that disappointment that you would normally have felt. I feel like, but the games themselves, and you're just watching them. I mean, there were some great games last weekend for sure.
Yeah, last weekend for sure, but the weeks before that, not so much. I've seen a lot of Louisiana Lafayette, Arkansas State, Southern Alabama. I mean, I've seen a lot of, Sunbelt, Funbelt. I mean, they've been fun games to a certain extent, but not necessarily games to get up for. But, this week, especially when you look at the SEC upcoming here, and we'll talk about 2 games before we get out of here. You have Texas A&M at Alabama, and then you also have Auburn, Georgia. But let's start with the Aggies and Crimson Tide. Alabama did what it was supposed to do against a mediocre Missouri team. I don't even remember who A&M played, to be quite honest. Maybe Alabama, especially early in their season, could they be a little vulnerable? If this game were in College Station, I might feel even a little bit differently on it, but it should be a pretty good game in that main 3:30 slot on CBS.
Yeah, it should. I mean, I'm not going to bet against Alabama now. Where's Texas A&M ranked at right now?
I have them. I'm on the ESPN homepage, and they have them at 13th. So I'm not. I would assume that's AP, but you never know.
Yeah, I think Alabama's pretty safe in that one, honestly. But I mean, there was some crazy things happening last weekend, so I mean, anything can happen for sure. But I still think Alabama probably pulls that one out.
I was going to say.
What about you?
Yeah, I think that Alabama will be Alabama. I think that they certainly get up for bigger games, and this will qualify as one of the bigger games. Missouri game does not qualify as a bigger game, and again, you're still trying to figure some things out in week 1. I think people were expecting Ohio State to hang 100 on Nebraska, might need to cool their jets a little bit. Week 1 is week 1. And then the other game that that jumps out to me is that Auburn at Georgia game. It's at Georgia. Auburn had some slow moments against Kentucky, and then was able to put it on cruise control and pull out that game, whereas Georgia really didn't look good against Arkansas. And I think, as I said on my show on Monday, I either said it on my show on Monday or somebody else's show, Arkansas is the SEC's Rutgers. I mean, they're just not good.
Yeah.
And that game was what 7-5 at the half. 7-5 Arkansas for that matter. One time Ohio State commit Dwan Mathis got the start. He was benched. You bring in your backup who's 20 of 29 for about 200 yards and a couple of touchdowns. Arkansas finally remembered, oh, hey, we're Arkansas. But even with that, not only was that game 7-5 Arkansas, it was 10-5 Arkansas. Arkansas scored in the first 7 minutes of the third quarter, and then at that point, UGA goes on to score 32 unanswered. So a Georgia team that everybody was really high on, who's still ranked number 4, that certainly didn't look super impressive against an Auburn team that also is in the top 10 at number 7, but didn't exactly blow the doors off of Kentucky, which, again, that was a top 25 versus top 25 matchup based on how the rankings were that week. But, if Auburn is as good as people are saying they are, I mean, I think that, I think Auburn should have probably been a little bit more dominant in the first half.
Yeah. And, this game excites me a little bit more than the Alabama game. Because I think it has the chance to go either way a lot more. Looks like JT Daniels, the USC transfer quarterback, is going to potentially get the nod this week for Kirby Smart and Georgia quarterback. But yeah, that situation was interesting with Dwan Mathis and everything like that. I saw on Twitter a lot of people were still dragging Georgia and Kirby Smart a little bit for the whole handling of the Jake Fromm, Justin Fields situation, which is interesting that, neither of them are there now, but that's still getting brought up quite a bit. And, just favoring Fromm over Fields and whatnot in terms of quarterbacks to Georgia. But yeah, a lot of teams, it was part of the reason why last week was so interesting was because a lot of these favored SEC teams and Big 12 teams were getting really pushed and struggled quite a bit, to be honest. And that's what made it so exciting. I don't think I ever got around to actually flipping on the Auburn Kentucky game, but I was watching to see if that one was going to get any closer, or continue to be close, I should say. But yeah, we will see. It'll be an interesting one at 7:30 on Saturday, without a doubt.
And you look at Georgia's schedule, and this is starting this week. This is their 3-game stretch. They have Auburn, Tennessee, and then at Alabama. And then, if we want to take it even a little further at this point, they go to Kentucky, which, Kentucky's good for an upset here or there. And then not home. They have the world's largest cocktail party against Florida. So they certainly have a schedule that is front loaded because at the final 4 games, Missouri, a surprising Mississippi State team with Mike Leach at the helm, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt. So Georgia certainly needs this game. I mean, they're sitting 1-0 right now. They're not in danger mode at any stretch of the imagination, but if they can't get off to a good start and they can't have a good game against Auburn, it could prove to be a pretty rough season for them just based on that schedule. I mean, obviously being an SEC only schedule, and they certainly don't have any favors, as I said, with how things stack up.
Oh yeah, it's a real meat grinder for them. I mean, you got number 7, number 21, number 2, and you got Florida's number 3, Mississippi State's number 16 right now. Man, that is a meat grinder of an SEC schedule for sure. As things stand in the rankings at the moment, at least.
Well, it's going to be a good week of college football. Maybe not a situation of where all of the best games are set up, but when you have 2 games like that, I certainly am ready for a little couch time to sit there and watch that with some queso and maybe a beer or 2. But I'm going to be ready for once the Big Ten starts up, and then once we're in November, the band will be back together. The Pac-12 will be playing. You'll have the Mountain West. You'll have the MAC. I mean, everybody should be back at that point. I don't know what we're going to do with ourselves at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it's still kind of wild though. Like, there still is a few more of these college football weekends until the Big Ten joins the fold, because it's like you're kind of like, okay, like you're watching it with more of a, if you're us or if you're anyone interested in Ohio State football, You're kind of watching it to see what these other teams are doing. But then you look at the schedule and you're like, man, they still do have, a few weeks of games until Ohio State's going to jump into that picture. But exciting nonetheless.
Exactly. Well, we've gone about 40 minutes, so we're going to wrap things up. Any final thoughts from you, Griffin?
Not particularly. I'm just, waiting here, waiting to crank out more articles, write about Ohio State football. What are we doing on Thursday? We're talking to the linebacking core, I believe, right?
I think so. My podcasting board is sitting right on my paper schedule that was sent from SID. I'm trying to get to it quickly. It is going to be, yes, Al Washington and players, time to be determined at this point. So we have that, and then we have Ryan Day on Friday. So, big week of coverage. Griffin and Jacob and Marcus are all doing a great job of cranking out content. You don't want to miss that over at Buckeye Grove. And, I want to thank everybody for listening to us for all this, for this entire show. As I said earlier this week, our goal is now to be back up to 3 days a week with this BIA podcast. So be sure to keep it locked in there. You can get us either directly at Buckeye Grove or on iTunes or Stitcher or any of those other great podcast outlets. But, with that, I just want to wrap things up and thank you for listening. For Griffin, I'm Kevin, and have a great day.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game, exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcasts Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.